Hey everyone, WoW Classic Fresh is right around the corner. We are only a couple days away from the Fresh release. I am so excited. Some of you might have decided that you're going to be leveling Shaman in Fresh WoW Classic, which is actually my favorite class. So in this video, I'm going to be giving you 10 quick tips that you should know about before you go about leveling a Shaman in Fresh WoW Classic. Hopefully these tips are helpful for you and increase your enjoyment through the Fresh WoW Classic leveling experience. Tip number 1 is that you can't actually pull your totems with any spell or by right-clicking them off of your nameplate. The spell Totem Recall and actually having your totems on your nameplate weren't added until after Vanilla WoW. So what this means for you when you're leveling is that once you put a totem down, it is staying down. You can't actually recall it. This can be a problem at times, like if you've placed a totem in the middle of somewhere that starts respawning, or if you've placed a totem where a patrol may be walking that you don't see. So just try to be mindful of where you're placing your totems and always kite back to your totems if you can and if it's a small enough space. One quick tip playing off of this is if you know that a certain totem is in a bad spot, like you can see a patrol walking towards it, you can actually pull individual totems from their location by placing a totem of the same type down where you are right away. So let's say I have a Strength of Earth totem in the middle of a walkway and I see a patrol coming at it. I can actually just back up 20 yards, drop another Strength of Earth totem, and of course you can't have two of them up at the same time, so it will effectively move my totem out of the way of the patrol. That's basically the only way to like recall or move your totems in Classic, and it's definitely helpful during the leveling experience to know this. Tip number 2, which is also extremely useful to know in group content, is that by default in Vanilla, your totems actually only have a 20-yard range. So like I said in the last tip, it's pretty effective to throw your 2-minute totems down and just kite mobs back around them so that you have the buff. 20 yards is not as far as you think, and it's actually pretty easy to move mob to mob, but move out of your original totem location. There is a restoration talent that increases this range to 30 yards, but you'll likely not take this talent for a very long time, if at all, while leveling up. So just keep that in mind for yourself and around others in group content, that your totems really have a pretty short range to be effective. Tip number 3 is in regard to weapon skill for enhancement. So I threw this one in here because I've seen a bit of misinformation based on when the question was asked at what time and what year. So there's a common misconception that if you level as enhancement, you select the two-handed axes and maces talent, you level a two-handed axe or mace, and then you respec, you'll actually lose your weapon skill. This was actually fixed in a later patch, and it's fixed on the patch that we'll be playing on in Fresh WoW Classic. So I guess the tip is that feel free to respec from enhancement and not have to worry about losing your two-handed axes or maces weapon skill. This was incredibly annoying way back in the day, and I'm glad they fixed this eventually. Tip number 4 is that you can heal group content in dungeons as your DPS spec for a pretty long time, right around until around Scarlet Monastery. If your group isn't playing too crazy, you definitely have the healing capabilities regardless of spec to keep up with the healing needs of a group through like Wailing Caverns, RFK, stuff like that. So don't be afraid to heal a dungeon as a DPS spec at lower levels. It's definitely viable. Just make sure you let your group know what the deal is, and make sure you get some weapon swings in too if you're healing as enhancement in Wailing Caverns or something. Tip number 5 is that Ghostwolf actually has a 3-second cast time by default, and you can only use it outdoors. This is good to know, like especially in hardcore situations, that you can't just instant Ghostwolf and run away. Actually, casting the Ghostwolf spell while you're getting hit by mobs will give you the standard spell pushback as well. So if you're trying to Ghostwolf out of a tough situation, it could be even longer than a 3-second cast. You can reduce this cast time down to 1 second with an enhancement tree talent, but you can never get it to instant cast in Vanilla. So just make sure to keep in mind while you're leveling, it's not like travel form for druids or anything like that. If you get in a tough situation and you want to Ghostwolf out, you are going to actually have to cast Ghostwolf. Tip number 6 is about short duration totems. So the most useful totems I've found to use while leveling up are all pretty short duration. 3 of the most effective totems I've used while leveling, number 1 would be Searing Totem. So this is a fire totem that you put down and it just single targets a mob. This is pretty good DPS, and the main upside of using Searing Totem is that you can drop it consistently and the mana cost is extremely low. I pretty much always try to have a Searing Totem down while I'm killing stuff from the second that I get it, because it's basically just free DPS for very low mana cost. Another short duration totem that's extremely useful is Stoneclaw Totem. This is a totem that has some health points and actually will taunt mobs off of you. So if you end up pulling 2 mobs at once, you can just Stoneclaw and the totem will taunt the second one off of you. This can give you the opportunity to finish up the first mob and heal up, or at least get the first mob down without getting beat on by both mobs. Keep in mind though, if you're leveling with Rockbiter weapon enchant on, that does increase your threat, and that might make it harder for your Stoneclaw totem to hold aggro off of you. And another short totem that's extremely useful while leveling, everybody knows this one, it's still extremely useful to this day on retail, which is Earthbind Totem. Drop the totem, run away, anything by it is slowed. Very, very useful. Tip number 7 is that there's a lot of spells you actually don't need to train as you're leveling up, and there's a lot of spells that you don't actually use while you're leveling up. So Shaman has one of the highest amounts of available spells in vanilla. A lot of them are flavor or utility spells that you actually don't need while leveling up. Something that comes to mind in this category is like the resistance totems, like nature resistance, fire resistance totems, stuff like that. Sometimes useful in group content, but not really that useful for solo leveling. So just be very mindful what spells you're training at the trainer. You can save a lot of gold by just skipping out on spells that you probably won't use. And on the flip side, if you just run up to the trainer at like level 40 and train everything that's available, you could go broke pretty quick. So make sure you're keeping up on the important stuff and skipping out on some of the less important stuff. Tip number 8 is about rank 1 shocks. So you can actually use rank 1 Earth Shock as an interrupt all the way up to 60, and you can use rank 1 Frost Shock as a slow all the way up to 60. If you're trying to conserve mana but you still need to interrupt a spell, you can just throw up a rank 1 Earth Shock. I think it costs 20 mana, and the interrupt duration is the same regardless of rank. Same goes with Frost Shock. You can use rank 1 Frost Shock to slow something, and having both of these rank 1 spells on your action bars can be extremely useful. Tip number 9 is more of an enhancement tip specifically, but it's something I see people not know about quite a bit, and it's actually that strength is your best offensive melee stat and not agility. Shaman actually get no attack power from agility in vanilla, and they get 2 attack power per point of strength in vanilla. So actually, in terms of melee DPS output, strength is your best stat and not agility. You'll want to keep this in mind because there's a lot of good leather strength gear that kind of gets passed up on, or that is easily obtainable through quests, and you're definitely going to want to select those over agility pieces if you can. Even saying that, strength is arguably like the 4th best stat for leveling. I think I'd rather have stamina, spirit, and intellect over strength in general just for leveling 1 to 60, but I think it's still a good tip to know while leveling that you should prioritize strength pieces over agility pieces if you have the opportunity to choose between one or the other. And the final tip, tip number 10, is to take the best weapon available while you're leveling up, regardless of what type it is or whether it's a one-hander or two-hander. I think a lot of people think that Shaman leveling in vanilla requires a two-hander because Wind Fury, and that's the best setup. This is true at different intervals as you're leveling up, or if you have a really good two-handed weapon, but in my experience leveling up solo, oftentimes it was best just to use the weapon that I had with the highest DPS, regardless if it was a one-hander or a two-hander. Obviously, if you're using a one-hander or if you're using something that's pretty fast, you probably want to use Rockbiter over Wind Fury. There are some use cases for Flame Tongue weapon as well, but in general, I like to use Rockbiter most of the time. But all that's to say, don't feel like you're locked into two-handed gameplay. Oftentimes, especially early on, the best weapon you'll have is a staff anyway, so that's a two-hander, but don't be afraid to, if you get a good one-hander, even if it's a dagger, to throw it on with Rockbiter and a shield. The damage will be at least comparable, and you should have a good time leveling up regardless. So that is 10 quick tips for leveling as Shaman in Fresh WoW Classic. I hope y'all enjoyed the video. Let me know down in the comment section below if you have any additional Shaman tips that I might have missed. I would also love to hear what class you're rolling for Fresh WoW Classic, even if it's not a Shaman. As always, thanks for watching, everyone. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.